In this final video, I want to explain to you why people write liquidation preferences in there. So I'm going back and using the perfect world example, but I'm going to put that 1x liquidation preference in here. So this is just a repeat of what we looked at from the perfect world example. What happens is, again, like I explained before, with a 1x return, the 40 million, 3 million gets cut out for the VCs, 1 million for the angels, 36 million to be distributed, ratably distributed, or at $7.20 a share. What that would change the payouts to is the angels would walk away with 8.2 million, again, very little more than they had previously, and the VCs would walk away with 10.2 million, which is 2.2 million more than they would. So in essence, what you have through the liquidation preferences is a shift of $2.4 million from the founders down to the the angels and the VC. Not an insignificant sum of money, but not terrible either. I mean, if you were asked the founders and the employees to tell the difference between 24 million and 22 million, it's a lot of money. So a liquidation preference, when things go really well, doesn't do a lot. But let's look at something when things don't go as well. Now, we're going to stick with the perfect world example. In other words, there isn't this massive transfer of the shares. There's still only 5 million shares to be distributed. But the purchase price is what's different. So instead of this thing getting $40 million, this thing's just limping along, not doing very good, what will sometimes be called a walking dead scenario. And they get a purchase offer of $10 million and they take it. Well, now let's look at what the liquidation preference does. We start up here with $10 million, take out 3 for the VC, 1 for the angels. Now there's only $6 million left. Well, at that 5 million shares out there, that means that we've got $1.20 per share. So now I go back and I take that $1.20 per share times their 3 million shares, they get 3.6 million. For the angels, they get 1.2 million based on 1 million shares at $1.20 a share, plus their $1 million liquidation, so they get 2.2 million. The VCs get their 3 million, plus again the 1.2 million from 1 million shares times $1.20 a share. They walk away with 4.2 million. So you can see here, when you get this very high acquisition price, yes, these folks shift some money, but they still come out very well. When you have a relatively modest acquisition price, given the amount of money that's been invested, what you see is these liquidation preferences really shift the returns towards the investors. That's the purpose of them. The liquidation preference is saying to the entrepreneur, you need to hit a home run. If you hit a single or a double, you're really not going to make very much money. And I would kind of consider this a double. Not great, but nobody lost any money, but nor did the entrepreneurs walk away with a life-changing amount of money from this deal. What's this look like for the IRR? You can see here that for the angels, this preserves a 17% IRR. Not a terrible outcome, but not what they were looking for. Again, this is why I would call this a double. For the VCs, it probably just qualifies as a single. So they made a very modest 12% a year to get their money back. And that's the purpose of the liquidation preference. When it's levied by investors, it's saying to the entrepreneur, you have to hit a home run. If you hit a single or a double, I'm going to get my money back, and there may only be a little bit of money for you. Therefore, the acquisition preference. 2 last things I want to show you. One is, let's assume that in this deal, the VCs had written in that they also get paid 10 cents a share. All preferred stock gets 10 cents a share as a dividend each year. Well, what I would do is I would add in 0.1, 0.1, and then this figure would go to 2.3. And you would see that would boost their return up slightly. 0.1, 0.1, 4.3. And again, it boosts their return slightly. So if you have dividends, and you can factor the dividends being paid out year by year into the IRR calculation. It's simply cash out, cash in. Obviously, it always has to start with a cash out for it to be an internal rate of return because you don't just start with the good. Let me show you what happens if you forget to put that minus sign in there. It just says tilt. I can't do this. This doesn't make any sense. I don't see any negative cash flows. Even if I were to change this to a negative cash flow, it still says tilt. I didn't have a negative to start off with. One final thing, I really like the IRR function because you can do things like you can turn it around and say, well, let's say it's going to cost me $10 million to invest in a piece of equipment that I think I'm going to be able to use for the next 5 years. And I believe it's going to return $3 million each year to my company in extra income. Well, I can model that. Put in minus 10 to purchase it, $3 million for 5 years, put it into the IRR function, and there it says you're going to get a 15% return on that initial $10 million investment. That sounds great unless my weighted average cost of capital is greater than 15%, and I'd have to say go take out debt to make this happen. So this is an easy way where you can model cash flows to see whether things make any sense. I realize this is some new terminology. I'm always there by the discussion board to ask me questions. You may need to watch these videos a few more times. You may need to play with the spreadsheets. All that's great. But this is part of being deal smart in terms of the lexicon of entrepreneurial financing. I find it very interesting. I think you're going to watch Shark Tank and read magazines about deal terms and the like with a completely different perspective now that you've thought all these things through.